Hi, I'm Rick Reef. Welcome to SoCal Insider. It's Oscar week, time for Hollywood to shine. But behind the glamour and glitter, a lot of movie industry people say LA's status as motion picture capital of the world is in jeopardy. Filmmakers are moving their shoots to places with lower costs and bigger tax breaks. Should California increase its incentives to keep those productions here at home? Also, Beltway pundit George Will has plenty to say about Jerry Brown, immigration, and the bullet train. But first, some updates of stories we've been following. Let's start with the California drought. David Nazar, what's the story?
Rick, Governor Jerry Brown has called it, quote, the worst drought California has ever seen. It's so severe, in fact, that it's become a national political issue. Both President Obama and House Speaker John Boehner have paid visits to the parched Central Valley, although not surprisingly with much different ideas about what's causing the problem. And Governor Brown has already called a state of emergency and now wants to pour hundreds of millions of dollars into fighting the water shortage. Brown and top Democratic state lawmakers want to spend almost $700 million to help drought-stricken communities throughout California, including about $15 million for those areas considered to have dangerously low drinking water supplies. About $550 million are slated to be generated from two existing bonds, basically by speeding up their spending. Those bonds were previously approved by voters. Governor Brown says there are no new taxes or fees on water use in the plan. Most of the money is slated for things like local water conservation and recycling efforts. For instance, new high-tech systems that can capture stormwater and recharge groundwater supplies. Now, money will also be generated from our state's general fund. However, some are saying we shouldn't tap into those funds because just as we have a water shortage, of course, we also have a dollar shortage in the state. The proposal is now working its way through the chain of command in the state legislature as lawmakers sift through this plan. Now, Governor Brown's proposal actually does not address long-term improvements to California's water supply and distribution system. Although, Rick, the proposal would also tap about $40 million, I want to say, in money raised from fees on polluters. Now, those dollars would go towards creating and improving more water and energy conservation projects.
David, what's the reaction to the governor's plan from those buddies of yours over at the Metropolitan Water District and the environmental group Tree People, both of whom we featured recently?
Yeah, and both good folks. Well, both MWD General Manager Jeff Keitlinger and Tree People President Andy Lipkiss, well, they applaud the plan. They really call it a very important first step. MWD's Keitlinger notes the governor is removing regulatory barriers to relief efforts, and Lipkiss likes the plan in part because, Rick, it includes education and outreach dollars for conservation, which of course he says is vital to cutting the water usage. Now, you should know, Rick, Congress is working on some drought bills also. However, those obviously face more opposition.
Yeah, really dueling plans. House Republicans have already passed a bill that would help Central Valley farmers by easing endangered species protections, but that's not likely to fly in the Democrat-controlled Senate. And meanwhile, California Senators Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer have a bill that could get some bipartisan support. It would divert more water from the Bay Area Delta, but still comply with the Endangered Species Act. Okay, David, another story covered California. When we last reported on the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare here in California, the pace of enrollment pretty abysmal, particularly with the Latino community. What's happening now?
Well, Covered California, which obviously is the state's health insurance marketplace, has had some rough days recently. The site was offline for a few days here and there. It's still dealing with a couple of other glitches. However, really, Rick, it's all relative, especially with the announcement of new enrollment numbers that many Democrats, Obamacare proponents, and yeah, even some patients are applauding. The latest stats show that, including the first half of February, the cumulative total enrollment in Covered California is about 830,000 folks. There has also been a reported increase in Latino enrollment of almost 30% since January. Orange County Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez has been advocating for increased and better services to both Latinos and folks who simply speak Spanish. Sanchez recently kicked off a program called Countdown to Enroll OC in the hopes of connecting Orange County residents to various health insurance enrollment services. The Congresswoman tells us she couldn't be happier that the Covered California numbers are above total projections and that Latino and Spanish-speaking enrollment has increased. And yet, with that said, Congresswoman Sanchez says, of course, more needs to be done, especially, Rick, consider that Latinos really comprise more than half of California's uninsured population, yet still total less than a third of current enrollees.
Yeah, indeed, and there is some debate going on about those new enrollment numbers and exactly what they mean. Okay, David, thanks for that. And finally, a tragic story you've been reporting on. After nearly 2 years, a then Beaumont police officer was set to stand trial on February 18 for shooting a Riverside County woman in the face with a pepper spray gun. What's happening there, David?
Yeah, doesn't it seem that this has been going on forever? Well, guess what, Rick? The trial of Beaumont cop Enoch Clark has been postponed once again. The Riverside DA's office tells us the case has been reset for April 21st. The DA's office is saying this is a very solid date, and the judge has ordered both sides not to be engaged in any other cases at that time, so there will be no interference with starting the trial. As we've reported, 31-year-old Monique Hernandez was a DUI suspect who got into an altercation with Officer Enoch Clark. Clark shot her with what's called a JPX pepper spray gun, which propels pepper spray at about 400 miles an hour. The shooting permanently blinded Hernandez. Officer Clark, who says he was acting in self-defense, was criminally indicted. And Officer Enoch Clark is facing 4 counts, including assault with a less than lethal weapon and use of force causing serious bodily injury. Rick, Monique Hernandez did have a prior DUI conviction from 2006.
Yeah, very tough cases, and very tough as well, you know, to ever get a jury to convict a cop in these kinds of cases where there's sort of a gray area. So we'll keep following it. Anyway, thanks, David. Conservative pundit George Will ventured out from the Beltway recently to visit us here in Southern California. George Will, thanks for joining me.
Glad to be with you.
You, of course, spend most of your time focused on Washington and the Capitol, but you also spend a lot of time looking at what's going on in the states. So what do you see happening in California?
Well, everything that happens here where 1 in 8 Americans lives matters. And California, for better or worse, is what Brandeis called a laboratory of democracy. And we've seen 40 years ago, this was a pioneer in infrastructure of the modern state. More recently, it has been a less happy laboratory of some of the problems with public employees, unions, and pensions, and all the rest. It's a state that is, as you know better than I, heavily dependent on the income tax, and therefore heavily dependent on, susceptible to the swings of revenues in business cycles, where the affluent go up and go down rather fast, and so do the fiscal fortunes of the state. Also, California is experiencing what we call entrepreneurial federalism. States competing to produce the best possible business client to lure things away. Volkswagen plant in Tennessee, for example. So California is finding, I think, pressure put on them to somewhat lighten the regulatory and tax burdens that they put on businesses.
Do you see that happening, though? Because, of course, Governor Brown, whose popularity right now is quite high, look, he raised the income tax. The marginal tax is the highest on millionaires in the country. But he could point to Silicon Valley, to the entertainment industry, and say that, you know, Californians like the kind of state they have, and they like the direction they're going in.
Well, as you know, there are a lot of Californias. The Imperial Valley is one California, the coast is another. I suppose if you go from Marin County to La Jolla with the on Pacific Coast Highway with the ocean always in view, that's one California. But there's another part of California that's hurting a lot, not just from the drought. The drought aggravated, some of us think, considerably by government policy. So California is big enough to be many states and a prism for the whole country.
What would you say of the job Jerry Brown is doing so far?
Well, he's benefited tremendously from what the Fed has done. The Fed has run up the stock market with now 6 years of near zero interest rates. It's had the intended effect of chasing money into equities, looking for higher yields that they can't get in bonds. This has driven up the stock market to a tremendous benefit for the 10% of Americans who own 80% of the directly owned stocks. It's trickle-down economics as practiced by a Democratic administration and by the Federal Reserve. This has benefited California, which has reaped the whirlwind from capital gains taxes, particularly from those people you were just mentioning, Silicon Valley, entertainment industry, and all the rest. What happens when, as it must happen, zero interest rates no longer obtained? That will be interesting to see.
Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, in many parts of the country with many governors, primarily Republican governors, not very popular. California has been in the forefront, beginning with the prior governor Schwarzenegger, in embracing Obamacare, and actually, relative to everybody else, people are signing up. It seems to be going fairly well. What do you make of it?
I don't know the numbers in California, and I don't know particularly the distinction between those who have signed up and those who have paid, that is, are fully enrolled. It's quite clear the original goal of 7 million people nationally by the end of March is not going to be met. They've defined success down to 6 million. They probably won't make that. They needed 40% of those signed up to be under 34 years old to help the healthy to help pay for the less healthy elderly. They're now getting not 40%, but about 25%. That's what's called the adverse selection. There's another adverse selection, and that is more women than men are signing up, and women have more recourse to the healthcare system. It's a long way to go, but the lesson of this, to say no more, bumpy rollout of Obamacare is that when government undertakes to micromanage 1/6 of the American economy, that's the healthcare sector, it's going to be difficult.
What do you think about the way California is handling the immigration issue?
Well, California's had more experience with it, just in raw numbers, than any other state. There are 11 million illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants, whatever euphemism you choose to pick. Simple fact is, for all the talk of no amnesty, we have de facto amnesty because the American people would not tolerate the police measures necessary to extract from our communities these 11 million people. 7 million of them are in the workforce. They have children who, being born here, are American citizens. 40% own their own homes. They are part of the fabric of California and part of the fabric of America generally. So it's time to find a way to normalize their status here, to make it legal. That doesn't mean a path to citizenship, and a path to citizenship need not mean a quick path. The Senate bill itself anticipated 13 years, which is a long time. Think back 13 years. That was 2001. 13 years is a long time in the life of this nation.
Well, do you think overall, what do you think of California's approach?
Well, California's approach is again making a virtue of necessity. That this is where these people have come, and they've, as I say, they're woven into the community. Try and imagine California, A, without them, and B, particularly the agriculture sector, which impacts the whole country because this is the breadbasket of the rest of the country.
California has this project called the Bullet Train. Going up now, it's up to $70 billion or so, and the governor is very steadfastly continuing to push it. Some people wonder where the money will come from, whether the courts will allow it, but it continues to move ahead. What's your thoughts on it?
Well, one doesn't want to commit psychoanalysis without a license, but it's hard not to feel that this is his way of saying, I can be what my father was. His father was the great builder of the post-war infrastructure that made California work. Now, Jerry Brown has, as progressives are apt to have, this mania about high-speed rails. To get from Los Angeles to San Francisco, you can go by car, you can go by train now, you can go by plane, you can go by bus. We need to spend $100 billion, and don't kid yourself, it'll be at least $100 billion that the state does not have and the federal government will not give you to make a slightly faster train. I mean, it's madness.
Finally, George, besides covering politics, you are quite an expert on the sport of baseball, the American pastime. As you know, here in Southern California, we have two teams with two of the highest payrolls in all of baseball. So what is your prognostication for this coming season for the Dodgers and the Angels?
7-game World Series.
Really, you think?
No, I don't really think. I mean, I'm not foolish enough to guess. I mean, baseball wouldn't be fun if it were predictable. But you've got two superb owners. Artie Moreno is here tonight. You couldn't have a better owner, more fan-friendly owner. You certainly have in the Dodgers people who are willing to put their money where their mouth is with regard to talent. So baseball is back in Southern California in a huge way.
I caught up with Will at the Orange County Business Council's annual dinner where he was the featured speaker. And now, does Hollywood need the state of California's help? Joining me, Paul Audley, president of Film L.A. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Rick.
What is Film L.A. and what's the problem you're dealing with?
Film L.A. is the film office for the region, created about 18 years ago by the city and county when they merged their offices together. We represent multiple cities and school districts in making filming happen in the region. And the problem we're facing is simply every other state virtually in the U.S. and countries are drawing this business away from California, leaving us with a loss of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in tax revenue.
Okay. Now California has incentives too, right? So like New York, just today, as we speak, there's Governor Cuomo in New York has announced that Marvel is going to be doing some shoots in New York, right? Are they getting benefits for that?
They are. New York offers $420 million a year in tax credits to a broad array of kinds of production. California has $100 million. It's a very limited as to who can apply for it. And the result is not only have we been losing feature films, but now we've lost most of the dramatic television as well, which is also a high employment, high revenue business.
And yet when I see the numbers, and sometimes when you say we've lost jobs, you've lost revenue, what you're really doing is saying that we used to have a market share of, let's say, 50% of all the shoots, and now it's down to, let's say, 40% or something like that. And had we kept the same market share, we'd have all these jobs. But really, in terms of actual jobs and dollars, it's been pretty steady, hasn't it, for the last few years?
No, it really hasn't. So we've lost more than 36,000 jobs over the last few years to other states and regions, billions of dollars in tax revenue. And for an example, in feature television, we used to do about 80% of dramatic television, and in 2012 we did 8%. So in many ways, I wish it was a 10%, 50 to 40 slide, but we're seeing much more dramatic problems than that.
Isn't there the problem, though, that it's preferential treatment in a way? After a lot of industries in California are having problems, and they don't all get these tax breaks, and maybe we should talk a little bit about just what the tax breaks are. Sure. But you know, there, as you probably know, the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is the highly respected by both Republicans and Democrats entity that analyzes the cost of things, has said that, in their opinion, it's probably a little bit of a net loss for California because what you give out is not made up for in the increased economic activity. How do you respond to that?
Well, first, that LAO report, which I also respect the agency, was done on a very short timetable, and they said frequently, we aren't sure, but we believe, we've been told, which is unusual for an LAO report. They're doing a much more extensive one. 2 independent studies, though, one out of UCLA and one by Los Angeles Economic Development Corp, showed that between $1.04 and $1.13 for every dollar given away is returned in state and local tax money to California. And that's just a direct impact. That doesn't include the fact that on a typical sort of mid-sized budget, there are 500 vendors who are being supported by that film as well, small businesses in California.
In some ways, though, as a part of the success of the movie industry, that people want to do shoots, especially the filmmakers want to be authentic. They want to go to where the shoots are. New York, for example. I mean, New York's Gotham City. You know, that's where Spider-Man's going to go flying around. You know, and that type of thing. So, isn't some of it inevitable that people want to go to Louisiana? You know, they want to be in a bayou, or they want to be in the skyscrapers of New York.
So, yes, location-based filming that needs that location has always moved around. The difference now is even films that are supposed to take place in Los Angeles are being filmed elsewhere because the tax credit's bringing them out. Battle for Los Angeles was filmed in Louisiana. They rebuilt the Santa Monica Pier because it was so much money given to them that they were able to do that there. So what we've seen is New York is frequently done in downtown LA. In fact, CSI New York, many of the shows are done in downtown LA. It plays for any city in the world. And because we've had a crew and vendor base to support it and make it cheaper to film here, they've stayed. Now with these tax credits, the corporations need that tax money, and they're going wherever in the world they have to get it.
Okay, and right now, what is the status of the tax credit California has?
So California has $100 million. It's not eligible for network television or premium cable, so only basic cable can use that, and films under $75 million. It will expire in 2016, and the result is it stopped a lot of the true desperate bleeding we had, but it has not returned the high economic value film and television.
So what do you want? Do you guys want to see a bigger credit?
We want to see a broader credit pattern, more like some of the other states that would allow that network television to come in. We lost 21 out of 23 new dramas in 2012 because of this. We want to see a broader based incentive and also more money in it. We aren't competing. We have to at least compete with our major and permanent challenger, New York.
What about the industry itself? When you do a tax credit, you're basically asking the taxpayers to help us out. Is the industry doing enough to get its costs down? And let me bring up one example. You can maybe educate me on this. The 30-mile zone. All right, the 30-mile zone is, where is that? La Cienega and Beverly, right at that intersection.
Headquarters, right?
And you draw the 30-mile line. If you're outside of that, the cost increases a lot. And there's a lot of places in this region that are outside of that. Now, wouldn't it be smart for the industry to just wipe that out and say, hey, this will help lower costs, or encourage people to shoot in this area here rather than take it elsewhere?
It probably would, and that is an issue that I think comes up all the time when the industry and the studios negotiate with the unions. It was originally designed to prevent fatigue of the drivers, I think. But the end result really is the new tax credit proposal in Sacramento actually bumps that credit once you're outside the 30-mile zone, which would neutralize that impact.
Well, in some ways, it's more efficient just get rid of the 30-mile, maybe make it a 100-mile zone or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure how efficient it will be when you have to negotiate those things between labor and management.
Okay. There's also been a lot of news lately. Eric Garcetti just named the new film czar. Who is he, and how do you work with that agency?
So Ken Ziffrin is the new czar, who replaced Tom Chirac, who tragically died shortly after being appointed to that position. We work very closely with the mayor and the council and other city councils and mayors on making sure that filming happens easily, and so we'll be working very closely with him.
Finally, do you ever get grief from people that say in their neighborhoods, my gosh, you're doing another film shoot and I'm not going to be able to park my car, and that kind of thing?
We do get some complaints, and our job really is to help resolve those. So there may be anything as simple as someone's having a party the same weekend as the filming wants to happen, and then what we'll do is tell that film company to reserve parking or to make sure there's access for it for that activity. So there's all kinds of ways to make it work. Most people, I think, now understand that this is a vital economic engine for California, and they need to support it. And so we've seen a lot more public support for it than maybe we had 5 or 6 years ago, when the industry was everywhere and their neighbors weren't talking about, my husband is working in Georgia for the next year because he can't find work in California.
Okay, well, Paul, this will be another story that we're going to continue to follow and see where it goes. Thanks much.
Thanks.
You can watch this show and past shows at rickreef.com. Segments of the show can also be viewed at pbssocal.org. My guests have been Paul Audley of Film L.A. Check out his website, and George Will. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again on SoCal Insider.
SoCal Insider with Rick Reef is brought to you by the following. 5 Point Communities is a proud sponsor of PBS SoCal. 5 Point Communities is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. More information available at www.5pointcommunities.com. Snell and Wilmer is a full-service business law firm with more than 400 attorneys in Orange County, Los Angeles, and throughout the West. On the web at swlaw.com. Snell and Wilmer. Straight talk, sound counsel. Practical solutions.
Relief Pod's latest generation of safety kits now go everywhere you go. Relief Pod's organized, color-coded, and compact safety kits keep first aid and emergency items accessible for a safe lifestyle every day. Relief Pod. Live ready.
A healthy future for you, your family, and your business is why Memorial Care Health System transformed healthcare. Our hospitals, physicians, and outpatient centers keep patients healthy and care for them when they're not. Memorial Care, one healthcare system leading the way.
Air pollution can make us sick. Asthma, permanent loss of lung function, even premature death. At UC Irvine, our research is leading to scientifically sound options for reducing pollution and protecting our health.